Hey guys, Ricky Howard here, and this is DoD Contract Academy. Today's lesson or podcast is actually a recording we did with one of our Contract Academy students. We were going through niche development or niche development, however you say that. And I think it'd be interesting just to listen to some of the steps that we go through, what he's interested in versus what the market is, the government market is actually buying, how you figure that out. And I'm really excited to let you know that DoD Contract Academy is now back open again and taking students. So you can go to dodcontract.com, get the new lower rate that we're offering. And that's not going to be for long. We're going to be closing it up probably in a couple of weeks. So if you are interested in getting group coaching and access to all of our training at a low monthly rate, you can get in there now. Once we close, the doors are closed. You can't get back in until we reopen it. So hopefully I will see you in there. And if not, that's okay too, because you're going to learn a lot from this episode. And look, we have a lot of episodes. The whole objective is to make government contracting accessible to everyone. So you don't have to go out there and spend a lot of money on consultants that are charging you 10, 20 grand a month. You can listen to the podcast and get a lot of that information that companies pay me to do, for instance. So I'm giving you a lot of this for free. And really all I ask is that you subscribe to our YouTube channel, subscribe to the podcast, leave comments. That's the type of thing that's really going to drive the numbers for us. So that's a gentleman's agreement between you and I, you being one of the gentlemen and me being the other. And now on to our episode.
We opened the bag now. We're going to publicize to everybody this awesome niche.
Yeah.
Don't do it.
Eitan, how are you today?
Hi, Rick. I'm doing great. How about yourself?
Good, good. So today we're doing something a little bit different. I've been working with Eitan a little bit about starting selling to the federal government. So he already has a business. We're not going to get into that, but what we are going to talk about is where the best place to start is, because he's involved in a few different areas. He has access to a few different companies. If you're listening to the podcast or been on our blog, website, we're a big proponent of looking and seeing what the federal government is doing spending wise before we start actually trying to sell to the government. And that's very important because you may just have to pivot a little bit to really hit on a government need. Doing some of this research ahead of time is very important. So what Eitan and I are going to do today is we're going to talk about some of his ideas, and we're going to look at the federal spending. And we're going to start making maybe a list of what we think is going to be some of the best places to start. So how does that sound, Eitan?
Sounds awesome. Looking forward to it.
Good. All right. So first, why don't we talk a little bit? I know we've talked, we've exchanged some emails, but why don't you give a brief, hey, here are some of the ideas that you're thinking about? Because as we reverse engineer it, we're going to have to start with something and we'll start analyzing where the spending is.
So I think during our exchanges, we spoke about originally call center services. We have access to different companies that offer this kind of customer relation services, whether it's for appointment setting, tech support, customer service, that kind of things. We talk about a contact with the manufacturing business, plastic bags manufacturing based out of the US. We talk about painting, literally painting services, painting houses, military bases, whatever that may be. So we have I have a lot of different contacts. So the idea of this meeting was really to do some kind of reverse engineering and see if we can come up with what's the best thing, most efficient that the government is currently looking for, and try to get for them.
Yeah, no, I like this approach, and this is something that we'll do with other businesses as well. A lot of times it will be something that they specialize in, and we just need to figure out, hey, I use cybersecurity companies all the time because I get a lot of them coming through. And the key with them is, hey, let's really pick an area within that huge topic, that huge industry that's going to make sense for you. That, by the way, is a very competitive industry to be in if you're selling to the government. So as far as some of the things that we talked about, I was discouraging you from focusing on products. So I like to put those, when I say products, just for everyone listening, I'm talking about low dollar products, things like office supplies, and I'm not saying that none of like the plastic bags, those things may be able to work, but we're usually talking about a low margin of error or low margin of profit potential bidding wars, and there's a different way of selling products too. So I do like to focus on services, technologies, those type of things. I think they resonate a little bit more, and the way that I see as a productive way of selling to the government and making money for small businesses, it seems like that is a better path forward. And so that doesn't apply to high dollar products. If you're selling
Right.
high dollar medical equipment, or you're selling software licenses, or you're selling you name it, the higher dollar stuff, especially if it's unique, that's a little bit different. But if we're talking about kind of commodities, I guess is a better way to put it. Typically, I like to stay away from those type of things, especially when we're starting out. So if you're okay with that, then I'm okay with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Sounds good.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to share if I share my screen, you're going to be able to see what I'm looking at.
Should be able to,
Okay.
hopefully.
All right.
Yeah. I see it.
Perfect. So what I'm going to start off with is we're going to look at, and I've got another computer over here. I have a couple other systems on. I use a variety of paid for tools to do some of my searches. So I'm going to start off by looking, and what I like to look at is federal spending history when I'm trying to decide something like this. It's a little more inaccurate if you're just looking at opportunities, right? Let's say that we were looking at call center opportunities, and we had over the next 6 months, we saw, hey, there's $200 million in call center opportunities coming out. But then we look in the federal sales history and we see, hey, the government's only spent $250 million in call center contracts. So this isn't true, but over the past 5 years, then we know, hey, maybe there's a mismatch there. So if we look over the past 3 to 5 years, we get a good sense of what the government's spending, and hey, is that going to be consistent over the years? Let's start with call center since you mentioned it. So what I am doing.
What you just mentioned, could that be because there's a need, but that hasn't been fulfilled?
It could be for a lot of reasons. It could be there are some things that the government buys almost everything, but there are limitations to that, right? And I'll just use an example of, I think it was the government hired someone that was involved with piano lessons and like performing like songs on the piano. And so the government, we'd certainly found contracts where the government hired people to play piano at events. We found like 20,000 contracts.
Okay.
But if let's say I was looking for an opportunity and for piano, and I saw, hey, there's a $20,000, $40,000 opportunity here next week in piano. If we to perform at, I don't know, a retirement ceremony or something, if we saw that and we based your business to the government off of that, we would have missed the fact that the government hasn't purchased any of it in the past 3 years. So that's a one-off. So there's some things the government buys, but it's only now and then, or it's not going to be enough to sustain you over time. So that's really what I mean by that. We want to make sure the government's buying it, and they're buying enough of it where a small business, and from small businesses, so a small business can jump in there and make that work. So now what I'm looking at right now are product service codes. This is one way the government classifies contracts. It's usually a more specific way than a NAICS code. That would be a North American Industry Classification Code. There's a lot of different ways to search for opportunities. I can also search by keyword, but I find these codes, although not perfect, give us a good sense of potentially what we're looking at. So when we're talking about help desk, like you can see here, this particular help desk code is specific to IT and telecom. Is that something like when you say help desk services or call center services, is there a specific industry or kind of?
No, if I had to give very broad categories quickly, there would be answering services. That would include customer service, could be IT, could be tech support, could be appointments, booking and settings.
This is for computing, including help desk service, desk side support, workspace technical support, audio, video, conferencing, printer support. So it looks like a lot that it would have to do with kind of IT or personal workspace, conference room and whatnot. Now we can see that over the past 3 years, the government spent $1.6 billion in this, just on that, right? So
in that field, on that particular job that they're
on this, as I described, help desk services. So this is, for anybody that's wondering what I'm looking at, this is a product service code, and the code is DE01, Delta Echo 01, IT and telecom. And so this is showing me how much, and basically, by the way, like any tool you pay for, I use a lot of different ones. Any tool you pay for is taking the information from the government websites that are free for everyone to use. So you can go to a website like usaspending.gov or FPDS, sam.gov. That's where the public repository is, because federal spending is public and the government has to report its spending. There's some stuff that's not going to be reported because it's classified. But then I will also say in the same breath, this is the government, right? And there's there's thousands of different offices out there making purchases. So they're all different. So some of them are good about reporting. Some of them, there's going to be a lag. So I always assume, and they'll even tell you, hey, assume a 6-month lag in reporting. And then these numbers are going to change. So if you look at anything up as far as federal spending, especially big picture stuff, if you look at it the next week, that number is going to be different and it could go up or down. So but we're trying to get the big picture. So
that's a pretty nice baseline.
Yeah. So if you see 1.6 billion they're spending, if this number was 20 million over the past 3 years, I'd say we're probably in the wrong place, right? Because that's not a lot of money for the government to be spending, especially over 3 to 5 years. Okay. So that's the first thing. The next thing, I want to get a sense of how does the government make those purchases? 1.6 billion. I can see that roughly a third of that is going through GSA. Do you know what GSA is?
Nope, I forgot. I knew that. The government, small administration.
It's just a way that the government, just think of it this way. The government can't make purchases the way you or I do. They have to, and this is where the federal acquisitions regulations come in. So the federal acquisitions regulations, just thousands of pages that can make this complicated. That's why we want to focus, and we only want, like for you as a small business owner, I just want you to have to understand the piece that applies to you. Now, having said that, the government can't just put anyone on contract because they want to. There has to be a way or a mechanism to put them on contract. They can compete something. They can have an open competition where everybody bids on it. They can use something that I loosely would throw GSA and other contract vehicles into something called category management. And category management, because competing something takes a long time. So as when I was a program manager, if I had to put a company on contract to do help desk services, right? So I know that I'm going to have, if that was like the program I was running, I would know that I'd probably have several contracts and tons of different efforts related to help desk that I had to put on contract. And a lot of them I wouldn't even know or were coming over the next 3 years. And I definitely did not want to have to compete every opportunity and spend a year putting a solicitation out there and competing it and making an award, like every time I had to do that. So one way the government gets around that is they will have either these contract vehicles, GSA, I'll talk about GSA in a second, where maybe your company and 100 other companies we'll call it the Ricky Howard contract vehicle. You all apply to be on the Ricky Howard help desk contract vehicle. And then just like you were sending a proposal in on a solicitation, and then we would have a board. It would probably take a year to get through them all. And then we would whittle it down to maybe 10 companies, right? That were going to be on the Ricky Howard contract vehicle. Now, once you're on this contract, you don't necessarily make any money, right? So all that means is that I can now go to your company. I don't have to have a competition. I can go to your company and put help desk delivery orders on your company through that contract vehicle. And usually there's a ceiling. So it might have a ceiling of, say, $100 million, right? It doesn't mean you're going to make $100 million, but it means that I have $100 million of ceiling on there to put any of those companies on contract when I need them, when I have funds and when I have a requirement. So hopefully that's not too confusing, but I want to understand if those type of things are in place and how much they're being used, because that could make it difficult for a company that's not on those contract vehicles to compete.
So you mean to say that if there are already companies under that GSA, then it would be too difficult to now compete and get into the picture?
GSA is a little bit different because now GSA you can apply to be on GSA. For most of the GSA, like the multiple award schedule, for the most part, you can put an application in and it takes about 6 months, I would plan on, where they're going to review your pricing, your past performance, and then eventually you get put on the GSA schedule. And now the government can buy your stuff through GSA. Now, a lot of companies have come to me. A lot of companies have been frustrated because they go out and they get a GSA schedule thinking they're just going to win a bunch of work, and they don't. It doesn't work quite like that. It just gives the government a way to get to you. So first thing I want to know is how much is it being used, right? So in this case, I can see that roughly a third of that 1.6 billion is going through GSA. What that means for you is you don't need to be on GSA, right? And I very rarely recommend a company try to go get a GSA schedule before they start selling to the government. Only if it's a industry where 70% of the purchases are made that way. That's where you really need to start thinking, hey, this is probably what I need to do. Because you also have a quota, right? If you're on GSA, they expect you to pull in, I don't know what the min is right now. It's 25 or 30 grand a year or something, but you have to be able to sell on that schedule and they have requirements. And it's a pain to get it. Once you have it, it's good. And this, like for this, I would say, hey, right now, like a recommendation would be, hey, we can start selling this type of thing. You don't need GSA right away, but once you start making some progress and we start getting you into some agencies, if the customers that you're targeting like to use GSA, at that point you can start the application process and get on there. Because there's also plenty of companies that have a GSA contract that you can partner with and go after this. So
that's interesting.
yeah, just a little bit on GSA. So 1.6 billion, so not a small amount. And by the way, we can look, there's other ways. I don't want to make this ad nauseum here, but here's some other larger contract vehicles that we can see. Like I was describing, this is NASA SOUP. This is, let's see, CIO SP3 is another. See, these are big contract vehicles that have been competed in. There's a lot of businesses on there. And when you're on there, the government can use those to put companies on contract. But I wouldn't worry about that for now. If we find an opportunity for you and you want to sell something like this, you can partner with a company that is on one of those vehicles. Okay. And by the way, this is for labor. It says labor right there. So I'm guessing that this is going to be a lot of providing people to do the work. Is that something you'd be interested in?
Yes, that's what we have. We have a couple hundred employees who are behind the phones.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so now we want to take a look at who are you selling to? Who is actually doing the spending? Because you don't want to focus on all of the federal government. It's a huge place. So we can see here, there's a breakdown that shows us kind of the top 3, 4, 5 agencies that are going to be involved. And we can break out the DoD into the separate services. So Department of Treasury and Homeland Security are at the top, or the top 2. And then the next are going to be all Department of Defense, Navy, Army, and Air Force. So that gives us an idea of who your targets are going to be. Now that can change depending on how your company's set up. Do you know, so with the small business that's registered and selling here, would they be woman-owned or potentially 8A or HubZone?
No, we're all inclusive of us a little bit, not a minority or anything like that.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. So it gives us an idea of who's doing the spending. Now I want to know, because you are a small business, so I want to have an idea of, is there any difference in how these are competed, if they're set aside? We can see that full and open competition is full and open 61%, another 20%, full and open competition after exclusion of sources. So that's about 81%, is going to be competed. What this means, full and open after exclusion of sources, that just means that, or it could mean that the government says, hey, I'm going to set this aside for a small business or an 8A, or I'm going to use some way to exclude other sources. And then I'm going to compete the solicitation amongst those businesses. That's what that means. Do you have questions about that?
So the full open competition after exclusion of sources. So that's something that would be good for me.
Potentially, yeah.
Type of company.
Potentially. And what I really like to see is here, this where it says not competed, not available for competition, not competed under SAP, competed under SAP. What that means is, because with any small business, my recommendation is I want to be able to get in before solicitation comes out and try to sell. So here, what this tells me is there's going to potentially be simplified acquisitions is a way of putting small businesses on contract. And typically you're doing that without a open competition, right? So that's where we find an opportunity ahead of time. And we are influencing the government, like influencing the potential solicitation. There are a lot of sole source contracts out there, and this is one of the ways those happens. Yeah, so we could see that the opportunity potentially for sole source is there. Let's look at set aside. So this is not necessarily how they're awarded, but this is before, when the solicitation goes out, is there a set aside used like small business 8A? So we could see 61% of these roughly no set aside was set in the beginning. And then The rest, obviously, there's about 40% remaining, do have
Right.
set asides. 8A is like the certification to get if you can get it. 8A is I don't have it right in front of me, but it's basically if you are a minority owned business there's usually a financial piece to it as well, meaning you've been disenfranchised in some way. There's a variety of parameters, and I can show you. You go to the Small Business Associate SBA website, and SBA website is going to give you all of the parameters there. You can look it up. Some of them it's not letting me do that. Some of the parameters are going to be like how much you make each year, or what is your total value, not including your house, of assets that you own. So there's going to be those type of questions, but you can go through the list of parameters and see if you meet those. And if you do, you could potentially put in an 8A application. But what's great about 8A is 8A has language in there that allows the government to give you a sole source contract. Sole source contracts are typically not easy to get, but 8A makes it a lot easier. And there's ways that we work with businesses to make that a little bit easier. Yeah, and for everyone not watching this, we're just looking at like a list of the different certifications and set asides used from 8A to service disabled, veteran-owned small business, et cetera. But something else we can do, we can split that up by the major agency. So I can see, all right, what does the Department of Treasury, how do they award? Is it going to be different than the government at large? And of course, it's going to be. So basically what I'm saying is, hey, are any of these agencies better to sell to than others?
So that will show you which ones to approach.
Yeah, this is just like at the end of the day, it's all about relationships and how you find opportunities and influence. But this is just giving us an idea of, hey, looking at the spending, are there some agencies that are going to, is in this category? Do we see more small business awards? Do we see a lot of set asides up front? Just gives us an idea. And especially if you did tell me, hey, we're 8A, I would be looking for the agencies that use 8A more than others. SDVOSB is a service disabled veteran-owned small business. They are going to, I can tell you, in almost every case, the VA is going to use that more than the other agencies. See, the Army uses 8A sole source for 30% of these purchases, right?
Big chunk.
So you can see that looking through the data is extremely important when you're trying to decide who you're selling to and what you want to do. Because if you were 8A, right, so this would tell me, even though the Army's not the top purchaser of these services, they certainly use this set aside more than the others, at least percentage-wise. So it just gives us an idea. And now I'm just looking through, these are different federal contract awards. If you had the time, you could go through and start looking at, hey, what are the types of contracts that have actually been awarded through here? And you might get, in the first line of these contracts, you might get a little bit of information so you can glean, hey, what kind of work would these guys actually have to be doing? So service and maintenance for camera systems sounds a little bit different than the initial description. Copier lease and maintenance. Looks like a lot of maintenance contracts. Application support at service desk. That's a little bit more in line with the actual description of the PSC code. Do those sound like things that?
I'm not sure, actually.
Yeah. So that's why it's important to look through this and dig into it. Managing printing services.
They all sound more like tech supports.
Yeah. So this is interesting. So they have a security assessment and vulnerability mitigation service, which is more of a cybersecurity, I would say, requirement that's coming out under this product service code. But I guess it's under IT and telecom. So we're seeing a lot of that too.
Mm-hmm. Right. So I wonder if there's a better description to what we're looking for.
Yeah, probably. And again, with the codes, you're going to get a lot of different things. That's just the way it is. It's not that specific. And if we were in a NAICS code, it would be even larger, right? Yeah. So it looks like there's going to be some things in here that maybe have help desk, but have a lot of other things lumped in there. Let's take a look at a couple of the others. So now for everyone listening, we're looking at a NAICS code for telemarketing bureaus and other contact centers. And it says here, it gives a description. So in different examples. So customer service call centers, order taking for clients over the internet.
That's much more in line.
Okay. All right. And the spending's higher too. Of course, this is broad.
Wow.
These are a little broader too. So just so you know, it's also going to have a lot of different things in there. Some of them you'll probably resonate with and some of them you won't. So this one,
Okay.
$3.4 billion in spending over the past few years. We go to schedules here, and I'm just looking at different contract vehicles being used. So this is good. A little bit coming through GSA, but it's less than a third. It's probably, let's see, probably 20% ish going through GSA. So you don't need a GSA contract. Again, that's one of those things you
Right.
want to
That's
determine up front, because you don't want to have to get that. You want to start selling first. And look at this huge segment here. So Department of Health and Human Services is doing 81% of the spending.
wow.
So 81% of that number, that's a huge part of that. And there aren't a lot of companies that they're
Oh,
selling to. So you've got probably a big company right here, and General Dynamics is a huge company, and you get a bunch of other ones right here. So this makes me wonder how much actually is going to small businesses. So no set aside used for 84%. But again, that's, I believe, just for the solicitations. Can you still hear me?
Yep.
I'm going to use another tool that's not on the screen, and I'm going to look at the actual contract awards. So for anyone listening, there's a lot of different tools and systems that you can use. Like I said, USA Spending, FPDS are free. You can use GovTribe, GovWinIQ. You can use bid search as different bid matching tools and things that you can use and by the way, different tools are good at, some tools are great at some things and really poor at others. So you got to play with them to figure out which ones work for you, depending on the type of research that you're trying to do. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to take this NAICS code and I'm just going to look for the awarded contracts, and I'm going to try to sort through the ones that were just awarded to small businesses. And there's some other NAICS codes too, like for telephone answering services and whatnot. Interesting. So of the 3.4 billion that we're seeing, hold on, actually, let me go back here. I don't think I have the right numbers here. Most of this is going to go to large businesses though.
I'll take 1%. I'll be happy with that.
Yeah, it's all you need, right? Yeah, so I'm showing about 164 million of that 3.4 billion. Again, these numbers are going to change there, but for the most part, right?
I can't do that. It's less than 1%.
Yeah, yeah, how about 164 million? And keep in mind too, that's over
half a point.
That's over years. That's over the past 3 to 5 years. FY23, fiscal year 23, nothing's going to be reported. In FY22, the government fiscal year starts October 1st and ends at the end of September. So I expect the FY22 numbers to be still updating all through this fiscal year, personally.
Okay.
So that's interesting. I want to, because I did see that there is telephone answering services was another.
Yeah. Yeah. Telephone sensors, would even say a virtual assistant. It's all related to the call center. Yeah, but telephone services, definitely. Answering services.
So what's interesting about this, so I'm looking at telephone answering services over the past 3 to 5 years, and it's 414 million. But the average number of offers received is very low, like 3 offers is what I'm seeing. And again,
that's a good sign, right?
That is a good sign. That is a good sign. And I'm going to go back and I'm going to check the other NAICS code as well.
That basically says that's not too competitive, right?
Yeah, just to put it in context, if like I was looking at cybersecurity services the other day, and it was between 50 and 75 solicitations, or 50 and 75 proposals would come in for each solicitation. Oh, listen to this, right? So the last code that we were looking on, what was that?
422.
422. 422. Average number of offers received, 204.
Oh, wow.
Got it. So think about that, right? Now we're on telephone answering services. The money's not as much, but there's way fewer. And by the way, I don't have like extremely high confidence in any system's ability to tell me how many offers are coming in.
I think it's not accurate.
I think it depends on what's being reported, right? And I think some agencies are good at reporting and some aren't. And by the way, there's also for anything in here that wasn't competed, then look at this. anything that's not competed, there are no solicitations. The only proposal they're getting is the proposal from the company that they're actually buying from. And they might just be giving them a quote, right? Because there's no, so you're going to see everything in here, but there's a ton of, this is amazing, actually, not available for competition, $261 million for telephone answering services, which just tells me, and so this could be,
Relationships already built from the get-go?
yeah, your relationships, you respond to RFIs and sources sought, you're finding those opportunities ahead of time and you're winning. Or maybe you're also probably, I would imagine a lot of this is going to be rolled up into larger contracts as well with a prime who needs telephone answering services. I think what I've seen so far, I think this is going to be a great area.
Oh, cool.
So telephone answering services. I think this is a winner. Hopefully this was provided some benefit and value to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks.
Good stuff. All right, sounds good. So for everyone listening, hopefully this provided value, just going through the drill of looking at research and data. Hopefully we didn't bore you here, but I think me and Aiton, we found a winner based on how they're actually putting some of this work on contract, what types of companies they're putting it on contract with. So it's not billions of dollars, but where they're putting contracts on small businesses, and there's not a lot of competition. So what there's a lot more research to be done here, but what this tells me is it's a good niche to further investigate. So again, this is just the starting point, and we'll take this up again next time.
Thank you, Eric.